I'm Tony Crimlusk. Are you sitting comfortably and are you up for an adventure? I hope so, because I want to take you on an adventure exploring what I think is a very interesting musical chord, and one that you'll almost certainly have come across whether you play ukulele, piano or any other harmonic instrument. As I've said many times, you don't need to know any musical theory in order to enjoy making or listening to music in any form and with any instrument, but it can help sometimes to understand what you're doing or what is being done to a piece of music. I call this chord the diabolical diminished sevenths for reasons that will become apparent later. And this video explores this chord from the perspective of the ukulele and the piano, but it also applies to other harmonic instruments and to other forms of music. Because the notes of the keyboard go up and down by semitones sequentially, it's easier to explain some of the things using a keyboard, but I'll also try to demonstrate points on the ukulele, and that's similar to the guitar. To start with, and just to be clear, Western diatonic music, that is music using scales built from alternate tones and semitones, mostly, though not always, uses tertian harmony, that is notes stacked by alternate letter names or thirds to create chords. Thirds can be either major or big, consisting of a 4 semitone gap, or minor, smaller, with a gap of 3 semitones. Grouped in threes, they form what is known as a triad, consisting of a root, a third and a fifth. Triads are the basis of chords, and that gives us just 4 kinds of chords: major, minor, diminished and augmented. If you're not sure about this, please look at my video on how chords are built. I'll put a link in the comments box. For example, on the ukulele we have the major chords like C major, A minor, diminished or C augmented. You can see on the keyboard you've got major chords like C major, which is a 4 semitone gap followed by a 3 semitone gap. You've got minor chords, which is a minor chord, a 3 semitone gap followed by a 4 semitone gap. You've got diminished chords, which are through 3 semitone gaps or 2 minor thirds, and you've got augmented chords, which have 2 major thirds or 4 semitone gaps. Now, the chord in which we are particularly interested at the moment is a diminished seventh chord, which has an interval of 3 semitones or minor thirds between all 4 notes. Interval is used to describe the gap or the distance between 2 notes. Examples of diminished seventh chords are, you may have used them with a bar like this on the ukulele. I'll show that on the keyboard. Examples of diminished seventh chords on my keyboard are A, C, E and G flat, or B, D, F and A flat, or C, E flat, G flat and, oops, hang on, is that an A? No, it can't be, because in tertiary harmony triads grammatically have to extend by alternate letter names, so it has to be B. Not to worry though, because B, if you lower it by a semitone, becomes B flat. If you lower it by 2 semitones, it becomes B double flat. So that's not an A, it's a B double flat. Get used to this because there's a lot worse to come. Now, because the notes of a diminished seventh chord are all the same distance apart, they're all 3 semitones or minor thirds apart. It's impossible to know which note is the root, the third or the fifth. So all diminished seventh chords have at least 3 names. That's why I didn't name them earlier on. And they repeat themselves using the same notes in a different order every 3 semitones. Because of this, diminished seventh chords are often used to modulate between any one of 8 keys, 4 major and 4 minor. Any one of the 4 notes could be a leading note. For example, this diminished seventh shape, treating that as the leading note, the F sharp, going to a G chord. Or this diminished seventh, treating that as a leading note and going to an A chord. Or this, treating that as a leading note and going to a B flat chord. Using the diminished seventh as a passing chord from a C chord to a C sharp diminished seventh to a D minor to a G7. And of course, it's the same on a guitar or a ukulele. You've got a C chord, for example, going to a C sharp diminished seventh, D minor, G7, or just straight to G7. Which is a very common little pattern. The really interesting bit. The distance between alternate letter name notes in the diminished seventh chord is 6 semitones or 3 tones, or what is called a tritone. For example, C to F sharp. This is a very distinctive and disturbing interval, and it's also sometimes known as the diabolus in musica, or the devil's interval, hence the title of this piece. It's also called an augmented fourth or a diminished fifth, depending on the spelling. And it divides the octave exactly in half. In other words, however spelt, a diminished seventh chord is made up of 2 tritones. It's used in music to convey unease, stress, dark tension or terror, and for dramatic effects as in Saint-Saëns' Danse Macabre or some heavy rock and film music. Some sources have said that it was forbidden by the Church in the Middle Ages, but this is strongly disputed, and the interval can be found used in many musical works, both before and after the Middle Ages. Much more importantly, these 2 notes are vital to the functioning of the dominant seventh chord, because one of them can function as the leading note and the other as the dominant seventh. Just a reminder that all the notes of the scale have names, and note 5 is called the dominant in both major and minor scales. A chord 5 chord frequently has the note added 7 notes above, which makes it a dominant seventh. For example, G7, C7, D7, and so on. Note that the dominant seventh notes fall a tone below the tonic. Looking again at the tritone of C to F sharp, you can see that the scale of G, the F sharp is 7 notes above the tonic. In other words, it's the leading note. Wants to lead up to the G. And C is the dominant seventh of D. And that desperately wants to fall. So you get those 2 notes, the leading note and the dominant seventh. One waits to rise compulsively upwards, another wants to fall downwards. This compulsive feeling is what gives dominant sevenths and secondary dominant sevenths their feeling of tension and unsettled power. Tension and relief is very important in music, as in life as well. I'm sure you can think of examples where you get, that's a relief. But there's still more to this fascinating chord. Look once again at the example of a tritone in the key of G. It's C to F sharp. But these 2 notes can swap function. The C, if I call it a B sharp, can be thought of as a leading note in the key of C sharp. And the F sharp can be thought of as the dominant seventh in the chord of G sharp 7. Now, these two notes will go inwards. You still get the tension, you still get the relief. This explains what you may have heard of as the tritone substitution. Chord 5-7 in one version can be substituted for chord 5-7 in the other. So, for example, in the key of C, you can substitute the G7 chord with a D flat 7, which is the dominant 7th in the other key, C sharp. So, but it's not confined to dominant 7ths. You can also target secondary dominant 7ths. There's a little sequence 1, 6, 2, 5, but using a secondary dominant 7ths. 1, and I'm going to target the A7 chord by putting a B flat 7 in front of it and then going on to the D7. Or I could use it as a passing chord onto the A7. Or I could target the D7 chord. Or as a passing chord, well, so much for the technical explanations. Now let's see how tritone substitution works in action on the ukulele. Taking the sequence we had before, which is a C, followed by an A7, followed by a D7, followed by a G7. Now you can substitute the G7, which is 5-7 in C, with a D flat 7 or C sharp 7, which is 5-7 in F sharp. So you can play this: C, A7, D7, C sharp 7, and you can substitute the A7, which is 5-7 in D, with a B flat 7, which is 5-7 in E flat. So you can play this. And finally, you can substitute the D7, which is 5-7 in G, with an E flat, which is 5-7 in A flat. So you've got this. Put simply, after all that effort, you can play a dominant or a second dominant 7th chord, one semitone above any other dominant or secondary dominant 7th chord, either as a substitute for it, for the 5-7, or as a passing chord onto it. An alternative explanation for tritone substitution, which is often given, is to say that the tritone substitution chord is the dominant 7th chord of the key, which is a tritone above it. And that amounts to the same thing if you work it out. Tritone substitution is used a lot in jazz music, but I'm not a jazz player. However, you can learn more about tritone substitution in jazz by searching the internet. There's a lot of information there. And all of this came about by exploring the diabolical, demented and disturbing diminished 7th chord. I told you it's an interesting chord. If you want to see this written out, there's a transcript at the end of the video. So I hope you enjoyed our adventure and found it interesting and helpful. If you did, please like and subscribe. But as I always say, whether playing, making or exploring music, whatever you play and whatever style, enjoy and have fun.